The laughter started before the race even began. It echoed through the massive orbital stadium like a wave, spreading from one section of the crowd to the next. Thousands of alien spectators leaned forward in their seats, pointing at the giant holographic screen above the arena floor. The interstellar speed trials had always been one of the most prestigious sporting events in the galaxy. Every 5 cycles, the fastest being from dozens of civilizations gathered to prove one thing: who truly ruled speed. And the competitors this year were terrifying. The camera drone swept across the starting line, projecting enormous images of each racer into the sky. The Varkoni runners stood like giants among the other competitors. Nearly 3 meters tall, their massive 4-jointed legs flexed as thick muscles shifted beneath dark armored skin. On their homeworld, they could outrun high-speed vehicles across open plains. Beside them stood the sleek Sailari sprinters, tall and elegant with silver scales that shimmered beneath the arena lights. Their species was famous for endurance. Once they reached full speed, almost nothing in the galaxy could keep up with them. Nearby waited the insectoid craft champions, their dense bodies low to the ground as their sharp limbs tapped impatiently against the track. They were explosive sprinters capable of terrifying bursts of acceleration. Every one of these competitors had spent decades training for this moment. Every one of them looked like a living engine built for speed. Except one. At the far edge of the starting line stood someone who looked completely out of place. The camera zoomed closer. The laughter in the stadium grew louder. "Wait a second," the main commentator said, clearly amused. "Is that the Terran competitor?" His reptilian co-host checked the floating data panel beside him. "It appears so," he said slowly. "Species, human. Registered name, Ethan Cole." The commentator raised an eyebrow. "Age?" The analyst paused. Then he looked again, just to be sure. 17. The commentator burst out laughing. 17. The crowd reacted instantly. Across the stadium, alien spectators stared at the holographic image of the boy standing quietly among giants. Humans were still new to the galactic stage. Compared to ancient civilizations that had traveled the stars for centuries, humanity had only recently joined the interstellar community. And so far, they weren't exactly famous for physical dominance. Humans didn't have armor. They didn't have claws. They didn't have natural weapons or enhanced limbs like many species. To most of the galaxy, humans looked fragile. And now humanity had sent a teenager to compete in the fastest race in existence. "This might be the strangest entry we've ever seen," the commentator chuckled. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think the Terrans may have misunderstood the event." Down on the track, the alien competitors had begun noticing him as well. One massive Varkoni runner turned and looked down at the human standing beside him. The alien's shadow alone nearly covered the teenager. "You are aware," the giant rumbled, his deep voice vibrating through the ground, "that this is the interstellar speed trials." Several nearby racers chuckled. Ethan looked up at the towering alien calmly. "Yeah," he said. The Varkoni blinked in surprise. "You seem young." "I get that a lot." Another competitor, a tall Sailari sprinter, tilted his head curiously. "Is this some kind of human joke?" the alien asked. "Sending a child." More laughter followed. The Varkoni leaned slightly closer. "You may still withdraw," he said. "There is no shame in recognizing your limits." Ethan slowly stretched one leg behind him, loosening his muscles. The giant frowned. "Did you hear me?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah." "Then why are you still standing here?" The teenager rolled his shoulders once. "Because the race hasn't started yet." For a moment, the surrounding racers went quiet. The Varkoni let out a deep rumbling laugh. "You humans are amusing." He gestured toward the massive track stretching across the arena. "The current record holder finishes this race in 2 minutes and 8 seconds, he said proudly. "That record has stood for over 200 cycles. Ethan glanced down the endless track. Then he looked back at the alien. "I guess we'll see." Above the stadium, enormous glowing numbers suddenly appeared. 60 seconds. The countdown had begun. The competitors moved toward their starting positions. Claws dug into the track. Muscles tightened. The stadium slowly grew quiet. Ethan stepped up to the starting line and lowered himself into position. Around him, alien champions crouched like loaded weapons. The final countdown began. 10, The arena fell silent. 9. Competitors leaned forward. 8. Sensors activated. 7. The Varconi runner beside Ethan smirked. 6. The Salari sprinters coiled. 5. Ethan placed his fingers on the ground. 4. His eyes locked on the finish line. 3. The entire stadium held its breath. 2. A faint smile appeared on the human teenager's face. 1. And in that moment, no one in the galaxy realized they were about to witness something impossible. The starting signal had not yet fired, but the tension inside the arena had already begun to build. Across the massive stadium orbiting Veltraxis, thousands of alien spectators leaned forward in anticipation. The laughter from earlier had mostly faded, replaced by the familiar excitement that always surrounded the interstellar speed trials. No matter who was competing, the race itself was legendary. But even as the atmosphere grew serious, one competitor continued to draw amused glances. The human, Ethan Cole, remained crouched to the far end of the starting line, fingers lightly touching the track. Around him, enormous alien racers adjusted their stances, muscles flexing as they prepared to explode forward at the signal. From the broadcast booth high above the arena, the commentators continued their analysis. "Ladies and gentlemen," the main host said, his voice echoing across the stadium broadcast network, "the competitors are now locked in position for the trials. We have champions from 12 different star systems today, including 2 Varconi elites, 3 Salari endurance specialists, and the current record holder from the Craft Dominion." A massive holographic screen above the stadium suddenly lit up with statistics. Names, species, and records scrolled across the display. One competitor had once sprinted across an entire desert continent on his homeworld. Another held the fastest recorded acceleration in galactic sport history. These were legends, beings whose names had been discussed for centuries in athletic circles. Then the list reached the final entry. The screen displayed a simple profile. Ethan Cole, species, human, age, 17, homeworld, Earth. The crowd chuckled again. "That entry still surprises me," the host admitted. "A human teenager competing against these athletes." Beside him, the reptilian analyst studied the data more carefully. "Interestingly," he said slowly, "there's almost no competitive record available for this individual." The host blinked. "None." "Very little," the analyst replied. "The Terran Alliance submitted minimal documentation. Only standard physiological scans and basic athletic testing." The host laughed again. "So the galaxy's most prestigious race is about to include a competitor whose only qualifications are basic athletic testing?" Several spectators in the nearby commentator platforms laughed along with him. Meanwhile, betting markets across the stadium had become extremely active. Holographic betting boards floated above the crowd. Odds shifted constantly as spectators placed wagers on the race. Most bets were focused on the usual champions. The craft runner Turvax held the strongest odds to win. His acceleration record alone made him a terrifying competitor. One of the Varconi elites came in second place for betting popularity, thanks to his incredible raw power. The Salari endurance champion followed closely behind. Then, at the bottom of the board, barely even visible, Ethan Cole, human. His odds were ridiculous. Most spectators weren't even betting on him to finish the race. Many were placing wagers on how far he would make it before collapsing. Back on the track, some of the alien competitors had noticed the betting boards floating above the crowd. One of the craft champions clicked his mandibles in amusement. "Your species is very optimistic," he said toward Ethan. The teenager glanced up briefly. "About what?" "About survival," the craft replied. Several racers chuckled. The massive Varconi runner from earlier shifted his weight and looked down at Ethan again. "You should not take the mockery personally," the giant said. "This race is difficult even for us." Ethan shrugged slightly. "I figured." The Varconi studied him for a moment. "You do understand the distance of this race?" Ethan nodded. 3.2 kilometers. The alien seemed slightly surprised. "Correct." He gestured toward the enormous track stretching across the stadium floor. Even elite competitors struggled to maintain speed for that distance. Ethan glanced down the straightaway again. The finish line was barely visible in the distance. "That's the point, right?" he said calmly. The Varconi let out a low rumble that might have been a laugh. "Nearby," The Salary sprinter leaned closer, curiosity replacing mockery. "You are not nervous," the alien observed. Ethan thought about that for a moment. "Should I be?" The Salary tilted his head. "You are about to race the fastest beings in the galaxy." "Yeah," Ethan said. "And you are 17. Also true." The Salary stared at him. "Then why are you calm?" Ethan took a slow breath and looked down the track again. "Because running is the easy part." Several racers exchanged confused glances. Back in the commentator booth, the reptilian analyst narrowed his eyes slightly as he watched the human. "There is something strange about this situation," he said quietly. The host raised an eyebrow. "You mean besides a teenager entering the trials?" "I mean the Terran Alliance," the analyst replied. "What about them?" "They insisted on this entry," the analyst said, "despite the ridicule." The host shrugged. "Maybe they are desperate for attention." "Perhaps," the analyst said, but his gaze remained fixed on Ethan. Down on the track, the final preparation alarm sounded. A deep mechanical tone echoed across the arena. 30 seconds to start. Competitors adjusted their stances. Claws dug deeper into the track surface. Muscles tightened like loaded springs. The crowd slowly grew quiet again. The excitement was returning. The interstellar speed trials were about to begin. Ethan leaned forward slightly, settling his feet against the starting plates. He exhaled slowly. The massive Arconi runner beside him glanced down one final time. "Human." Ethan looked up. When the signal sounds, the giant said, "Do not try to match our acceleration. You will injure yourself." Ethan nodded. "Thanks for the advice." The Varconi seemed satisfied with that. High above the arena, the final countdown lights began flashing. 10 seconds remaining. The stadium fell completely silent. 9. Alien runners crouched lower. 8. The craft champion scraped his claws across the track. 7. The Salary sprinter leaned forward like a coiled spring. 6. The Varconi runner smirked. 5. Ethan's fingers pressed lightly into the ground. 4. His breathing slowed. 3. His eyes locked on the finish line. 2. The arena lights flared. 1. And the starting signal exploded across the stadium. The starting signal detonated across the arena like thunder. For a split second, nothing moved. Then the racers launched. The Varconi runners exploded forward with terrifying force. Their massive legs slammed against the track like pistons, each step sending vibrations through the stadium floor. Within 2 strides, they were already moving faster than most ground vehicles on civilized worlds. Beside them, the craft champions burst into motion like living missiles. Their powerful limbs struck the ground in rapid-fire rhythm, accelerating so violently that dust and fragments of the track sprayed behind them. The sleek Salary sprinters followed just a fraction of a second later, their long bodies flowing forward with graceful precision. Their stride looked almost effortless, yet their speed climbed rapidly with every step. The stadium erupted with cheers. From the broadcast booth, the commentator shouted over the noise. "And they are off." An incredible launch from the Varconi competitors. "Look at that acceleration." The craft runner Turvex is already gaining ground on the inside lane. Holographic speed trackers began flashing above each racer, numbers climbing rapidly as the competitors accelerated. 120 km h, 150 km h, 180 km h. The crowd roared as the leaders surged forward across the massive straightaway. But almost immediately, the broadcast cameras noticed something else. Someone falling behind. The human. Ethan Cole had started moving at the same moment as the others, but his first few strides looked almost casual compared to the explosive power of the alien racers. "Ah, there it is," the commentator said with a chuckle. "Our human competitor appears to be taking a more conservative start." The camera zoomed in. Indeed, Ethan was behind. Not by a huge margin yet, but enough for the alien racers to notice. The Varconi giant glanced briefly to his side as he thundered forward. The human was already several meters behind. The alien snorted in amusement and focused on the race again. Behind them, Ethan continued running. His stride looked different from the others. Where the aliens used overwhelming power, Ethan's movements were smooth, controlled, almost rhythmic. Each step landed lightly. Each breath came steady and calm. His eyes never left the finish line. The commentator continued narrating excitedly. Early lead from the Varconi runner in lane 3. The craft champion Tovex is pushing hard on the inside, while the Sailari sprinter in lane 5 is already building incredible momentum. The speed trackers kept climbing. 200 km H. 220 km H. The alien champions were already approaching speeds that would destroy most biological organisms. The stadium shook with excitement, but the human remained behind. Some spectators began laughing again. Look at him. He's barely keeping up. Did the Terrans really think this would work? The broadcast cameras followed the leaders as they passed the first kilometer marker. The Varconi runner maintained a slight advantage, his enormous strides covering ground rapidly. The craft champion was close behind, accelerating with relentless intensity. The Sailari sprinter had finally reached full rhythm, gliding forward like a silver arrow. Then one of the sensor operators noticed something strange. Control. What is it? Another technician asked. The human competitor's speed reading. What about it? It's climbing. Back on the track, Ethan's stride changed. It happened subtly. His steps became longer, more powerful. His arms began moving faster, his body leaning forward slightly as he pushed harder against the track. The distance between him and the other racers began shrinking. At first, no one noticed. The camera drones were focused on the leaders, but the sensors kept updating. 210 km H. 220 km H. The technician frowned. That can't be right. Back in the broadcast booth, the reptilian analyst leaned forward suddenly. Wait! The commentator glanced over. What? The human? What about him? The analyst pointed at the secondary display. Look at his speed. The commentator glanced down casually. Then he blinked. Hold on. On the screen, Ethan's speed indicator was still climbing. 230 km H. 240 km H. That's impossible, the commentator muttered. Human physiology shouldn't support that level of acceleration, the analyst said quietly. Down on the track, Ethan passed the first kilometer marker. The leaders were still ahead, but not by much anymore. His stride looked effortless. The wind roared past his ears as he pushed harder, muscles working in perfect rhythm. His breathing remained steady. Inhale, exhale. Each step landed precisely. Each push against the track sent him forward faster. The alien racers ahead of him hadn't noticed yet. They were focused entirely on beating each other. The Varconi runner powered forward with brutal determination. The craft champion pushed his acceleration even harder. The Sailari sprinter glided forward with flawless efficiency. Then one of them heard something behind them. Footsteps. Fast footsteps. The Varconi glanced over his shoulder. For a moment, he didn't understand what he was seeing. The human was catching up. Fast. Very fast. Back in the control booth, alarms suddenly began flashing across several sensor panels. Control, we're getting irregular readings. What kind of readings? The human competitor's speed. How high? The technician swallowed. 260 kilometers per hour and still increasing. The commentator's voice faltered as he stared at the screen. Ladies and gentlemen, we may be experiencing some kind of sensor malfunction. But the reptilian analyst wasn't blinking. His eyes were locked on the track. No, he whispered. That's not a malfunction. Down on the track, Ethan pushed harder. The distance between him and the alien champions was disappearing rapidly. The wind screamed around him. The ground blurred beneath his feet. And for the first time since the race began, the leaders realized the human behind them was moving impossibly fast. At first, the alien champion thought it was a mistake. The sound behind them didn't make sense. Footsteps, fast ones, too fast. The massive Varconi runner glanced over his shoulder again, expecting to see the human still far behind where he belonged. Instead, his eyes widened. The human was closing the distance. Rapidly, each stride the teenager took covered an impossible amount of ground, his movement smooth and precise as if the speed didn't affect him at all. For a moment, the Varconi actually slowed slightly out of pure confusion. That can't be right, he muttered. Beside him, the craft champion Turvax noticed it too. The insectoid racer tilted his head slightly as his compound eyes locked onto the approaching figure. The human was moving like a blur. Back in the control booth, technicians were staring at their instruments in disbelief. Numbers were flashing wildly across the sensor displays. "Control, we're getting unstable readings." "What kind of readings?" "The human competitor." "How unstable?" The technician swallowed. His speed just crossed 300 kilometers per hour. Another operator shook his head violently. "That's impossible. No biological species can maintain that velocity on foot." The alarms began flashing red across several monitoring panels. In the commentator booth, the host stared down at the live data feed, his earlier amusement completely gone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said slowly, his voice filled with disbelief, "the sensors are showing some extremely unusual readings from our human competitor." Beside him, the reptilian analyst leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the track below. "It's not the sensors," he said quietly. "What?" "It's real." Down on the track, Ethan's world had narrowed to one thing: the finish line. The wind roared past his ears, tugging at his racing suit as his legs drove him forward faster and faster. Every muscle in his body worked together in perfect rhythm. His heart pounded steadily in his chest. His breathing remained controlled. Years of training guided every step. Inhale. Push. Exhale. Push again. The alien champions ahead of him were finally reacting. The Salari sprinter turned his head, silver scale flashing beneath the stadium lights. "What?" Before he could finish the thought, Ethan surged past him. The movement was so fast it barely registered. One moment the human had been behind him. The next moment he was gone. The Solari's eyes widened in shock. "That's impossible." The Varconi runner heard the shout and turned his head just in time to see a dark blur racing up beside him. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. The alien saw something he hadn't expected. The human wasn't struggling. He wasn't straining or gasping for breath. He looked calm, focused. Then Ethan passed him. The giant Varconi felt the rush of air as a teenager shot past like a missile. "What?" The craft champion Turvax tried to push harder, his powerful limbs slamming into the track with explosive force. But it didn't matter. The human flew past him as well. The stadium sensors struggled to keep up. Speed indicators flickered wildly. 320 kilometer h. 340 kilometer h. Technicians shouted across the control room. "We're losing tracking." "The system can't calculate acceleration at this rate." Back in the commentator booth, the host stood halfway out of his chair. "What are we seeing right now?" The reptilian analyst didn't answer. His eyes were wide as he watched the human streak down the track. The crowd had gone completely silent. Thousands of alien spectators stared at the arena in stunned disbelief. The human teenager was now far ahead of every other competitor. The finish line rushed toward him. High above the stadium, the massive timing display prepared to record the result. Ethan pushed one final time. His legs drove forward with explosive power. The white finish line flashed beneath his feet, and the race ended. For a moment, the stadium remained completely silent. The timing system froze as it calculated the result. Then the number appeared. 13.04 seconds. Across the stadium, gasps echoed like shockwaves. That can't be right," the commentator whispered. The reptilian analyst slowly shook his head. "That distance in 13 seconds. Back on the track, the alien champions were still running. They hadn't even reached the halfway point yet. At the far end of the arena, Ethan gradually slowed his pace and came to a relaxed stop beyond the finish line. He placed his hands on his hips and looked back down the track. The other competitors were still racing. For several seconds, no one in the stadium moved. No one spoke. Then the full realization hit. The human teenager had just crossed the finish line of the interstellar speed trials in 13 seconds. And in doing so, he had shattered every speed record the galaxy had ever known. For several long seconds after the result appeared, the entire stadium remained silent. The giant holographic display above the track continued showing the same number, 13.04 seconds. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the broadcast commentators seemed frozen. Finally, the main host found his voice again. To that must be an error." His words echoed across the stunned stadium. Beside him, the reptilian analyst was staring down at the data screens with intense focus. "Check the sensors," the host continued quickly. "There's no way the race just ended in 13 seconds. Technicians in the control room were already working frantically. Data streams poured across their monitors. Every speed sensor along the track was being reviewed. Every camera angle was replayed, but the results didn't change. One technician spoke quietly. "Timing systems confirmed." Another checked the motion trackers. "Acceleration data confirmed." A third operator leaned back in disbelief. Every sensor recorded the same result. Back in the commentator booth, the analyst slowly lifted his head. "The data is correct." The host blinked. "What?" "The race result is accurate," the analyst said calmly. The host looked down at the track again. Far in the distance, the alien champions were finally approaching the halfway point of the race. Meanwhile, the human competitor had already stopped running. Ethan Cole stood just beyond the finish line, stretching his arms as if he had just completed a warm-up jog. The stadium erupted. Thousands of spectators jumped to their feet at once, their voices forming a chaotic storm of disbelief. "That's impossible. No biological species can move that fast. The sensors are broken." But even as the protest continued, the race officials were already reaching the same conclusion as the technicians. The data was correct. The race had ended, and the human had won. Down on the track, the alien competitors were finally beginning to understand what had happened. The massive Arconi runner slowed his pace as he crossed the halfway marker, breathing heavily. His eyes drifted toward the distant finish line. The human was already standing there, waiting. The Varconi stopped completely. "That cannot be real." Behind him, the craft champion Tovax gradually slowed as well. The insectoid racer stared down the track in stunned silence. "Impossible," he clicked. Yet the evidence was right in front of them. The human had finished the race, minutes before they would. High above the arena, the commentators were struggling to process what had just occurred. I don't even know how to describe this," the host admitted. Beside him, the reptilian analyst looked thoughtful. "There may be an explanation." The host turned toward him instantly. "Please tell me there is." The analyst brought up a new data panel. "Human physiology." "What about it?" "Earth," the analyst continued, "has unusually strong surface gravity compared to many inhabited worlds in the Coalition." Several scientific charts appeared on the broadcast screens. Humans evolved under nearly twice the gravitational pressure of some galactic civilizations. The host blinked. And that means their muscles and bones developed to function under much heavier loads. The analyst pointed toward the track below. To species adapted to lower gravity environments, human movement can appear extremely powerful. The host slowly looked back toward the human teenager. "You're telling me he's naturally stronger?" "Potentially far stronger," the analyst said. The host stared at the screen. "Then why hasn't the galaxy seen this before?" The analyst paused. "Perhaps humanity has never been motivated to demonstrate it." Down on the track, race officials had finally approached Ethan. The teenager looked slightly confused by all the attention. One official held up a tablet displaying the race result. "You finished the course in 13 seconds. Ethan glanced at the number. "Yeah." The official blinked. "You do realize the previous record was 2 minutes and 8 seconds. Ethan shrugged. "I thought it felt a little slow." The official stared at him. Across the stadium, spectators continued shouting in disbelief as the full reality of the situation spread through the crowd. The fastest race in the galaxy had just been won by the smallest competitor, a human teenager. And he hadn't just won. He had completely destroyed the record. High above the arena, the commentator leaned toward the microphone again. "Well, ladies and gentlemen across the galaxy." He paused, still sounding stunned. "I believe we just witnessed the birth of a new legend." The camera zoomed in on Ethan as he stood calmly near the finish line. But far away, on dozens of viewing stations across the galaxy, something far more important was happening. Alien military observers were watching the broadcast carefully. Scientific institutions were already analyzing the data. And leaders of powerful civilizations were asking the same question. If a 17-year-old human could do this, what could a fully trained adult human achieve? Back on the track, Ethan glanced up at the roaring crowd. He smiled slightly. For him, it had just been a race. But for the rest of the galaxy, everything had just changed. Rocket,